Good afternoon. On today's Angry Alien Bulletin, my channel has experienced something that, well, I've never experienced before. YouTube has forced me to delete two of my videos, delete them completely because of a copyright claim that was submitted against my channel. Now, I've had a few copyright issues over the years, and oftentimes they're very, very easy to resolve, especially since the vast majority of them are actually fraudulent claims being made by people who claim to own the content but don't actually do so, and YouTube gives an avenue to dispute any copyright claim made against the channel. In this case, though, I didn't have an opportunity to dispute it at all. I was given 1 week to resolve the issue with the claimant, who, by the way, in my opinion, doesn't actually own the content in question. He was just a reporter working for a local news agency back in 1978 when he carried out this interview, so it seemed to me that the local news station owns the content, not him, but nevertheless, he's the one who submitted the claim, and YouTube just said that I had a week to delete the videos myself, or they would delete them and hit my channel with 2 copyright strikes. Those are the sorts of things that can ultimately get your channel shut down. So I tried to reason with the claimant, because he only has a few thousand subscribers, and when he released his copy of this interview, it had barely been watched by, well, maybe 7,000 to 8,000 people. So this really increased the viewership of the interview in question, which you would think a reporter would want more people to hear the truth. But he couldn't be reasoned with. Didn't want to do anything except essentially make me pay. And although I acknowledge I may indeed have done something wrong here, although I still question it because I think the content belongs to the local news station back in 1978 and not the reporter who actually conducted the interview, but YouTube gave me no opportunity to dispute the issue. Of course, I went to their customer service department trying to find some way to make my case, and well, it kind of went like this. Look, I've never had this kind of claim made against me before. I mean, this is really strange. Is there anything I can do? I really don't think this is a legitimate claim. Here at YouTube, we do not resolve copyright disputes. Well, yeah, but I still think I should have an opportunity to tell my side of the story. Here at YouTube, we do not resolve copyright disputes. Well, yeah, but you've essentially resolved it already by forcing me to delete the content. You've basically taken the claimant's side here. So you did resolve the dispute, just not in a very fair way. Here at YouTube, we do not resolve copyright disputes. So you get the idea. So what you're about to watch is a re-release of the video in question, but I have edited out the interviews, and instead I'm going to go ahead and give a recap of what was in the interviews and also provide a link to the copyright claimant site so that if you want to watch the actual interview, you can. Yeah, I'm a little loath to give this guy any more viewership, but at the same time, I think it's more important that people get an opportunity to see this interview, to hear the story as it was told by the person who experienced it, rather than do something that is more in the interest of my channel or something that's a bit vindictive. Be nice if some of these claimants learned how to not be vindictive. But all that having been said, I'm also going to provide some additional information, some more encounters that I have dug up over the years that bear a great deal of resemblance to the actual incidents that took place in Indiana, both this year, back in 1978, and also way back in 1950. Good afternoon, viewers, and welcome to another Angry Alien Bulletin. It appears that things are happening at the Pentagon, even though publicly the Pentagon has been saying a lot of stuff to essentially deny any sort of extraterrestrial origin to UAPs, or to even question whether or not UAPs are a legitimate phenomena. But then Strangely enough, the Pentagon has been releasing a lot of material to indicate that they remain very interested in the UAP phenomena, and they are no closer to an explanation than they were when we started. And I certainly hope with the new administration that was voted in that we're going to get a little bit more transparency. But frankly, I'm a little skeptical of that because we didn't get a lot of transparency from the last 4 years that Trump was in office. But who knows? Maybe with Elon Musk having a powerful position, that may change. We'll see how things develop. But regardless of what's happening in the world of politics, the Pentagon seems to have differing policies when it comes to their public position on UAPs. Yes, they commonly say that there's no extraterrestrial origin, or at least no evidence of extraterrestrial origin for UAP, that 99% or so of UAP sightings have mundane explanations, and the rest probably have mundane explanations too, perhaps some sort of experimental aircraft or experimental spacecraft re-entering the atmosphere. But having done all of that, the Pentagon is releasing a lot of new content and also new documentation to suggest that they haven't come any closer to solving this mystery at all. And let me tell you something, the latest information that the Pentagon put out is very intriguing indeed. And then last month in Indiana, we had another mass UFO sighting. But what was very interesting about this sighting, for one thing, a massive UFO was picked up on radar. And number two, this entire series of events that transpired in October of this year in Indiana bears a great deal of similarity to another mass sighting that took place way back in 1978. Hey guys, present day Angry here again. You're going to find that a good chunk of this video has nothing to do with the Indiana interview or anything associated with it, but it's an entirely different topic that I'm talking about. And yet, for some reason, for the first time ever, YouTube forced me to delete the entire video because of a small clip near the end of it. So I'm going to let you decide why all of this might have happened. So during the course of this video, I'm going to be sharing some footage that the Pentagon recently made public, and even though it doesn't appear to be anything spectacular or unusual, we need to keep in mind that this footage was captured by the Project Blue Book organization back in the 1950s. In other words, a time before intercontinental ballistic missile tests, before any satellites were re-entering orbit, and before any sort of high-altitude planes could create the effect that we're looking at right now. And by the way, this particular footage was captured by a U.S. fighter plane that was pursuing whatever this object was, that was traveling much faster and at a much higher altitude than the fighter could achieve. And to this day, all of the objects you're going to be seeing in this footage from the 1950s remain unidentified. But far more modern is the documentation that the Pentagon recently released entitled Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena Reporting Immaterial Disposition. And it makes very clear what the Pentagon's position is on UAPs and even establishes some very particular categories of UAP sightings that up to this point, both the Defense Department and NASA have told the public do not exist. In other words, it seems that there are certain types of UAPs that have been observed in environments that previously the government said had not actually happened. And I'm going to give you some examples of those categories here in just a moment. But first of all, let's go ahead and start with the introduction of this documentation. Quote, the U.S. government has observed UAP in or near the territory and or operating areas of the United States, of its allies, and of its adversaries, and observing, identifying, and potentially mitigating UAP has become a growing priority for U.S. policy policymakers, lawmakers, and warfighters. The potentially ubiquitous presence of UAP defines the national security implications of those anomalies, which range from operational hazards and threats to technological and intelligent surprise to adversaries' strategic miscalculations. It is imperative that the DoD provide UAP incident, incursion, and engagement and material for the department's detection and mitigation of potential threats, exploitation of advanced technologies, and informing policymaker and warfighter decisions. Now, there's a paragraph on page 3 of this document that I find to be especially interesting. Unidentified anomalous phenomena are sources of anomalous detections in one or more domain: airborne, seaborne, spaceborne, and/or transmedium that are not yet attributable to known actors and that demonstrate behaviors not readily understood by sensors or observers. Anomalous detections include, but are not limited to, phenomena that demonstrate apparent capabilities or material that exceed known performance envelopes. A UAP may consist of one or more unidentified anomalous objects and may persist over an extended period of time. And the first category is spaceborne UAP, sources of anomalous detections above the Kármán line. And up to this point, NASA has insisted that there is no connection between UAP and any objects that have ever been seen in space, and yet for some reason the Pentagon is creating an entire category for these types of objects. Then of course you have airborne UAP, the more common ones, sources of anomalous detections between Earth's mean sea level and the Kármán line. Then seaborne UAP, sources of anomalous detections at or below Earth's mean sea level. And then transmedium UAP, sources of anomalous detections that transit one or more domain. Why establish all these categories if you didn't have UAP sightings to put into those categories? And the categories get even more interesting. For example, UAP objects, which are corporeal artifacts of unidentified anomalous phenomena. UAP may contain one or more UAP objects, such as airborne craft exhibiting apparent anomalous capabilities, and UAP material are samples in whole or in part of UAP objects, in other words, debris. Then there's the UAP incursion, a UAP incident in, on, or near U.S. military installations, operating areas, training areas, special use airspace, proximity operations, and other areas of interest. And then, a very interesting category, UAP engagements, a kinetic or non-kinetic response to a UAP intended to deny, disrupt, or destroy the phenomenon and or its objects. And the categories get even more intriguing. A UAP hazard is a safety risk to persons, material, or information by UAP that do not demonstrate hostile intent. And then a UAP threat is a force protection and or national security risk to persons, material, or information by UAP that demonstrate hostile intent. And then a UAP reaction is the apparent UAP response to stimuli, including but not limited to UAP detection, observation, interrogation, and or engagement. Now, another fascinating detail is in their list of resources, the Pentagon actually has a link to their Freedom of Information Act reading room. This is very intriguing, especially one document about anti-gravity. But before we get to that, I need to talk about what has happened in Indiana recently. Another mass sighting of UFOs, this time in fairly close proximity to a military base, and the observations were made in a town called Kokomo. And of course, numerous observations have also been made by untrained observers, as well as observers who have some military background, that these objects bear a great deal of similarity to military flares, especially given how they briefly light up and then disappear, followed by another one in sequence. And I would agree with this assessment if it wasn't for the fact that a strange and enormous rectangular object passed through the region at roughly the same time and was picked up on Doppler radar. And apparently this thing also left an atmospheric shock wake as it passed through the area, indicating that it was a physical object of some kind and not just a radar ghost. But even this, in my opinion, was not strange enough to warrant a video on the topic, given how many other UAP sightings there have been around the world in the last few months, if it wasn't for the fact that something very similar to this happened in Indiana in 1978 as well. Present day angry again. So the first piece of 1978 footage came from a news station called WLKY, a CBS affiliate in Indiana. And in the town of Bloomfield, there was an outbreak, a rash that is, of UFO sightings that bore a great deal of resemblance to the UFO sightings that were reported this year. Large numbers of bright objects that seem to appear and disappear, sometimes reacting to the presence of viewers, and also moving without sound, and sometimes even moving in unusual formations that changed and morphed depending on the presence of viewers. A local reporter claimed that between 25 to 50 people had seen the UFOs over a course of several months, and she herself also made a sighting with 6 amorphous balls of light hovering above a treetop that lit up the sky like daylight. They began to move upwards again without noise and then form some kind of formation that seemed to resemble a letter of some kind. And then if a car passed by, they would disappear one by one. And then if an aircraft passed by, they would also vanish, only to reappear once the vehicle was gone. Whenever I'm preparing a piece of UFO content, I do my best to look for corresponding incidents or similar incidents that may have taken place in the same region, sometimes in the distant past, involving witnesses that could not possibly have known the witnesses that observed the UFOs in modern sightings. Now, of course, balls of light, as were described in this particular incident, is a very common thing with UFO sightings. Where's the connection to this modern incident? Well, watch this. So this is the clip that I got in trouble for, again from 1978, 2 housewives who observed an enormous rectangular UFO over a soybean field, and it was actually comprised of 3 different rectangles with some sort of circular feature in the center rectangle, and it moved again without noise. It had 2 white lights and 1 red, but what was the most interesting feature about this sighting is the fact that it was a close encounter of the second kind, as these sorts of things tend to be called. It left physical evidence of its presence with a perfectly circular indentation left in the soybean field. And unlike most crop circle frauds, this one had intertwined soybean stalks, so thoroughly intertwined that you couldn't actually pull them up. Just an amazingly intricate indentation in this field. Again, if you want to see the interview and also the visual evidence of this UFO's presence, well, I have the link in the description. Again, I'd prefer that the truth get out there than worry about the inconvenience and money that this gentleman caused me. That being the case, though, we also need to talk about the similarities that this object bears to the so-called Red Square UFO that appeared over Vandenberg Air Force Base a few years ago. I have a video on this topic linked at the end of this one, but even though the shape was a bit different, a lot of the other features were the same, especially the fact that the UFO was absolutely enormous and it moved with no sound. But the circular feature, that is one of the most interesting aspects of this particular sighting because of the anti-gravity connection. Now, I'm not about to tell you that crop circles aren't hoaxes as a result of this story, but it is very interesting that the vegetation ended up becoming so incredibly intertwined. That is not how faked crop circles tend to end up with that kind of sophistication, that kind of complexity to where you can't pull it up again. And this story brought to mind another story, or rather a paper that was recently declassified in this Freedom of Information Act reading room entitled Anti-Gravity for Aerospace Applications. Yes, the U.S. military has been studying possible anti-gravity technology, and one of the most interesting anti-gravity engines described in this paper is the Robert Forward's dipole gravitational field generator. Dr. Forward was a theoretical physicist who worked a lot on interstellar craft designs and theoretical technologies, and this machine could generate an anti-gravity field by accelerating a super dense fluid through pipes round around a torus, as pictured here. According to Forward, accelerating a hyperdense mass through a machine like this would create something called the Linz-Thirring effect. Any mass with a velocity and an acceleration exerts many different general relativistic forces on a given mass, and these forces act in the direction of the velocity and the direction of the acceleration of the originating mass. In summary, these forces are the equivalent to gravitational forces, which can be used to cancel the Earth's gravitational field. Such an engine would, of course, have to be perfectly circular, as was the feature that was described by these witnesses on this large rectangular UAP. Not only that, they would generate a circular anti-gravitational field that might affect vegetation on the ground in strange ways. Again, I'm not saying for certain that that's what we were observing here, but I find it quite fascinating that we have the Pentagon making these sorts of things available to the general public. After they were made available from Freedom of Information Act requests, now just about anybody can look these papers up, and the military was taking this technology, at least in 2010, very seriously. But in my opinion, what's even more intriguing than the materials that the Pentagon has recently released is the stuff that they haven't released. For example, CIA records created in 1956 entitled Unidentified Flying Objects. There are actually 2 of these files, and according to the description of these files, they are, quote, an edited production featuring footage of unidentified flying objects from both Montana and Utah. Captions included that the beginning and the end of the film maintain that the footage was authentic and that the footage was studied by the Photo Reconnaissance Laboratory at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and the U.S. Navy Photo Interpretation Center in Washington, D.C., adding that staff were unable to identify the objects. Up to this point, and I've been waiting for a long time for the National Archives and the Pentagon to digitize these files, they have yet to make them available online. That's something I think that should require another Freedom of Information Act request. I'll keep you up to date on the progress with that. And here's present day Angry again, living up to my promise of giving you a little bit more content regarding yet another sighting that took place 28 years prior to the 1978 sighting. This one happened in Charleston, West Virginia. Quote, here's another one of those flying saucer stories, but with a slightly new twist. This is from a local newspaper in West Virginia. State House telephone operator Mrs. Hazel Lewis said that she saw a rectangular object flying at terrific speed high above the city yesterday. It circled the area and then shot straight up and out of sight, she said. She said it made no sound, and other eyewitnesses reported the object as well. Again, a long-standing pattern of a similar object being sighted in the United States over many, many decades. Interesting indeed. Oh, and one other thing, Freedom of Information Act requests do not come for free. You usually have to spend several $100s for the government to do the necessary research in order to provide you with the information requested on a Freedom of Information Act request. And if I could get 1% of my subscribers to support me on Patreon at the $5 level, that would not be a consideration. I could pay for all of the trips that I take, the launches that I go to observe other of the conventions I attend, and for all of my Freedom of Information Act requests if I could just get to that threshold. So if you'd like to support me there, all the details are in the description. Thanks very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and as always, stay angry about space.